I paid for her college tuition, covered her rent for years, bought her 2 cars, and never asked for anything back. Then she sued me for $250,000 claiming emotional abuse, and she dropped everything. Before we begin, please subscribe, and I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from? The smell of morning coffee filled my kitchen as I sat alone, staring at the stack of photo albums that told the story of my life's sacrifices. The warm aroma that had always comforted me seemed hollow today, a thin mask over the weight pressing against my chest. The quiet hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the room, the kind of silence that makes a man reflect on every choice he's made. I reached for the first album, the burgundy leather one with worn edges, and opened to a page where Lindsay grinned wide, her little hands gripping the handlebars of a pink bicycle. I remembered the overtime hours that paid for that bike. I had worked 2 shifts back to back on a bridge project outside of Cleveland, trudging home long after midnight with concrete dust still clinging to my boots. She had declared that bike the most beautiful thing in the world, and her joy had been worth every exhausted step. That memory should have warmed me. Instead, it twisted something deep inside me. Turning the page, I saw her again at 16, standing proudly next to a shiny BMW convertible. I had fought her on that car. I had suggested something practical, something reliable, like the used Honda Civics Ethan and I had looked at. But Lindsay had insisted. "Everyone at school has nice cars, Dad." I'll be so embarrassed. I had given in, convincing myself it was just one more sacrifice to help her feel special. She totaled that car 6 months later. I closed my eyes, remembering the phone call, the sound of her crying, and the thousands of dollars gone in an instant. Beside those images of indulgence were reminders of Ethan. His high school graduation photo, where he wore the same plain black gown as every other student. His smile, reserved but steady. He had worked part-time at a grocery store back then, saving up for a beat-up Honda that he maintained with his own hands. I flipped again, finding his wedding day, a small ceremony where he had insisted on paying half despite my offer to cover everything. That was who Ethan was, modest, responsible, grateful. The house around me was quiet. The neighborhood outside alive with the steady pulse of suburban America. Lawn mowers droned somewhere down the block. A neighbor waved while walking his dog. It was Father's Day weekend, a time when I should have felt content, proud of what I had built. Instead, the weight of decades pressed heavier, and I couldn't ignore the bitter contrast anymore. One child who had grown into a man I admired, and another who had never stopped taking. I set the photo album aside and leaned back in my chair. The leather creaked under me, familiar and worn, like everything else in this house. My engineering career had taught me to build things that lasted, bridges, roads, structures meant to endure. But what had I built in my own family? Had I built strength, or had I built entitlement? The phone buzzed on the table, breaking my thoughts. Lindsay's name lit the screen. I hesitated, then answered. "Dad." Her voice bubbled with excitement, high and breathless. "You're not going to believe this. The presidential suite has a balcony that wraps all the way around, and you can see dolphins from the bedroom window." I set down my coffee slowly, forcing my voice into warmth. "That sounds amazing, sweetheart. Which resort did you pick?" "The Oceanfront Grand, in Florida. It's absolutely perfect. They have a helicopter tour over the reefs, and tomorrow night we're dining at a 5-star restaurant. The chef trained in Paris." My pen tapped against the mahogany desk. I kept my tone light. "Kyogo's beautiful. I remember you mentioning wanting to visit there." I let the silence stretch just long enough. "How much is all this running you and Chad?" There was the slightest hesitation before she answered. "Oh, we've been saving up. Chad got that bonus from his sales job, and I've been putting money aside from the boutique." Her words landed like stones in my gut. Chad's so-called sales job was 3 hours a week at a used car lot. Lindsay's boutique work barely covered her coffee habit. I straightened in my chair. That's wonderful, sweetheart. I'm proud that you've both been so responsible with your finances. Yeah, well, we really wanted to do something special for our anniversary. I frowned. Your anniversary isn't until October, Lindsay. Another pause. Longer this time. I meant our dating anniversary, from when we first met. I pulled up my calendar in my mind. That was in February. Dad, you're being so weird about this. Can't I just be excited about my vacation without getting the 3rd degree? The defensive edge in her voice hit me like a cold wave. I remembered the little girl who used to curl up in my lap and ask for another bedtime story. But the woman on the phone now, her tone sharp, her excuses flimsy, was someone else entirely. Of course you can, I said softly. I'm just impressed. A presidential suite, helicopter tours, 5-star dining. That has to be running close to $20,000. It's not that much, Dad. God, you make it sound like we're blowing our life savings. I'm not criticizing. I just want to understand. I need to go pack. We're leaving in an hour. I'll send pictures. The line went dead, and I stared at my phone. 29 years of fatherhood. And I had learned to read my daughter's moods like weather patterns. The nervous laugh when she mentioned Chad's bonus, the stumble over the anniversary, the quick shift in tone whenever I pressed. She was lying. I could feel it in my bones. I sat there as the afternoon sunlight stretched across the floor, the hum of the air conditioner filling the silence. Memories swirled through me. The tuition checks for Emory University, the apartment deposits, the credit cards I had paid off for her. I had stopped checking the statements long ago, trusting her word. But as I sat in my office that Father's Day weekend, listening to the neighborhood kids laughing down the street, one truth crystallized. Lindsay's excitement wasn't built on her savings. It was built on mine. I leaned forward, pressing my fingertips against my temples, fighting the ache building there. My daughter's laughter still echoed in my ears, but beneath it was something darker, something I couldn't shake. The presidential suite, the helicopter, the Paris-trained chef. And then I heard myself ask again, almost whispering into the empty room, "And how exactly are you paying for all this, Lindsay?" The sunlight streamed through my office window as I stared at my credit card statement, my heart pounding harder with every highlighted charge. The words blurred for a moment before snapping into clarity again. American Airlines, $1,200. Oceanfront Grand Resort, over $12,000. Blue Water Helicopter Tours, $1,200. Paradise Dining, $750. Each line was like a nail being driven into the coffin of trust I had carried for my daughter. I leaned back in my chair, running a hand down my face, the leather creaking under my weight. I had once told Lindsay, the day I handed her that card, that it was for emergencies only. She had hugged me, her eyes shining with gratitude, and promised she would never misuse it. That memory came back now like a knife, the warmth of her promise turning into a cold reminder of how far she had drifted from the values I had tried to teach her. The chapter of my life that had always been about sacrifice was suddenly colliding with the reality of betrayal. I thought about the bridge projects I had worked on in Cleveland, the long nights calculating load factors and tolerances, the fatigue in my bones after back-to-back shifts. All those hours had bought her more than bikes and cars. They had bought her a future, and now, she was using my hard work to fund champagne toasts in a suite overlooking dolphins. I reached for the phone and dialed her number. It rang 4 times before she answered, her voice buoyant. "Hey, Dad, what's up?" I swallowed the bitterness that threatened to spill out. "Hi, sweetheart. How's Florida treating you?" "Oh my God, it's paradise. We just got back from the helicopter tour, and tonight we're going to that restaurant I told you about. Chad's taking pictures of everything. It's amazing." "That's wonderful. I'm glad you two are enjoying yourselves." My eyes moved back to the glowing numbers on my screen. Lindsay, I need to ask you something. Sure, what's up? Are you using my credit card for this trip? The silence stretched for 4 long seconds. I counted them, my old engineer's instinct measuring time with precision. What? No, Dad. Of course not. I told you, we saved up for this. Are you sure? I kept my voice neutral. Because I'm looking at my American Express statement, and there are charges from your hotel, your flights, even the helicopter tour you just mentioned. That's impossible. Maybe someone stole your card information. You should call the bank right away. Her voice had the smooth quality of a rehearsed lie. I had heard it before, in boardrooms, when subcontractors tried to cover mistakes. Concerned, sympathetic, but hollow. I'm sure that's what happened, I said softly, masking the iron rising in my chest. I'll call them right now. Thank you for letting me know it wasn't you. Of course, Dad. I'd never do something like that. You know I'd ask if I needed help with anything. I know you would, sweetheart. Enjoy the rest of your trip. Thanks, Dad. Love you. Love you too. When the call ended, I stared at the phone for a long moment. My daughter had lied to me, not stumbled or evaded, but lied clean through, with the kind of polish that chilled me. The girl who once confessed to breaking a vase before I had even noticed was gone. In her place stood a woman who could steal and lie with a straight face. I stood and moved across the office, the sunlight cutting sharp lines across the hardwood floor. My gaze fell to the photo album stacked neatly on the shelf. The burgundy covers held decades of memories. Lindsay at her kindergarten play, her graduation, family vacations. I pulled one down, flipping through the pages with stiff fingers. There she was, at 5 years old, gapped-toothed and beaming beside that pink bike. There she was at 16, posing with the BMW, and at 22, smiling in cap and gown, an Emory University graduate, tuition, room and board, $160,000, a degree in art history she had never used. I closed the album and picked up another, this one filled with Ethan's milestones, his high school graduation, the second-hand Honda he bought with his own savings, the modest apartment where he and his wife had started their life together. He had asked me for help 3 times in his adult life, and each time he had paid me back quickly, with interest. The contrast was stark, and it sat heavy in my chest. I returned to my desk and opened my laptop again. The cursor blinked in rhythm with my pulse. I began scrolling back through months of statements, my fingers tight on the mouse. September. Louis Vuitton, $1,200. October, 4 Seasons, Atlanta, $445. November, Nordstrom, $892. December, Le Bernardin in New York, $347. Each charge came with a memory of a conversation, a story she had spun, a purse Chad had supposedly gifted her, a spa trip she claimed was a great deal, a dinner a friend had supposedly paid for. Lies, layered one over another, building a wall of betrayal. I picked up my calculator, though I already knew the answer. My thumb pressed each button slowly, deliberately, as though each digit carried the weight of her choices. The total came out just under $24,000. I set the calculator down and leaned back, my eyes on the ceiling. My daughter hadn't just slipped once. She had been stealing from me systematically, month after month, while smiling at me over family dinners and calling me the best dad in the world in social media posts. The anger boiled inside me, but it wasn't the wild, fiery kind. It was cold, controlled, like the slow tightening of steel cables. I closed my laptop and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet street. A boy pedaled his bike down the sidewalk, laughing as his father jogged beside him. The sight was like a ghost, a reminder of my own past. I had once been that father, giving everything to a child who believed the world was hers. My phone buzzed. A text from Lindsay. Having the most amazing time. The suite is incredible. She had added a picture, her and Chad, grinning with glasses of champagne, the ocean behind them. I stared at the image, my jaw tight. She thought I was a fool. I returned to my desk, opened my laptop, and pulled up the folder where I kept every financial document I had ever saved. My training as an engineer had taught me to track details, to keep records precise and complete. Now, that habit would be my weapon. As I highlighted charges, filed screenshots, and organized notes, a shift took place inside me. I was no longer the father who reflexively gave, who bent over backward to make sure his daughter never felt lack. I was the man who built structures to last, who knew how to spot weaknesses and correct them. The betrayal had cracked something open, but inside the crack was steel. By the time the sun began to set, my desk was covered with documents, a fortress of proof. My coffee sat cold beside me, untouched for hours. My stomach was empty, but I didn't notice. All I felt was clarity. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about respect, about dignity, about the line that had been crossed. When I finally shut my laptop, the house was bathed in shadows. The day surrendered to night. I walked through the hallway, the photographs on the walls whispering stories of better years. My hand brushed one frame, Lindsay at her sweet 16, eyes bright, arms wrapped around me. I stood there for a long moment, the silence heavy. Then I whispered into the dark, a vow more than a thought. She thinks I'm an easy mark. She has no idea who she's dealing with. The glow of my laptop lit my tired face as I traced 6 months of charges, each one a dagger of betrayal buried deeper by my daughter. Line after line confirmed what my gut already knew. This wasn't a one-time mistake. It was a pattern, a system. A way of life Lindsay had built on my blind trust. I remembered the day I had handed her that credit card, years ago. We were sitting at the kitchen table, sunlight streaming through the blinds, her eyes bright with hope. "Dad, I'll only use it if I truly need to," she had said. At the time, I had believed her. I wanted to believe her. But those words came back to me now like bitter irony, mocking the man I had been then, so willing to trust, so desperate to protect. I leaned back, feeling the weight of what this chapter of my life was becoming. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about character, about what kind of woman my daughter had become under my roof, with my sacrifices paving her way. The house was quiet except for the hum of the air conditioner. Outside, the neighborhood was calm. Porch lights flickered on as dusk fell. Sprinklers ticked rhythmically across manicured lawns. My neighbors probably thought of me as the man who had it all figured out. The nice house, the steady career, 2 grown children. But behind these walls, I was a father realizing his sacrifices had raised one child with integrity and another who had learned nothing but entitlement. I scrolled further, every entry sharp in my mind. A designer purse from Louis Vuitton, a hotel weekend in Atlanta, jewelry from Tiffany's, dinners at upscale restaurants. All of it woven into the fabric of Lindsay's lies, stories about Chad's gifts, promotions at her boutique job, little windfalls that never existed. I could almost hear her voice in those stories, light and airy, designed to deflect suspicion. My hand hovered over my phone. I thought of calling her back, demanding honesty. But what good would that do? She had already shown me she could lie without blinking. If I wanted the truth, I would have to dig for it myself, piece by piece, until there was no room left for denial. I opened a new folder on my computer and began to gather the evidence. Screenshots of bank statements, photos of her Instagram posts flaunting the very trips I was paying for, notes linking dates, amounts, and her excuses. My training as an engineer had taught me to track every measurement, every calculation with precision. tonight, I applied that same discipline to my daughter's deceit. Hours slipped by. My coffee grew cold. The sun sank behind the horizon, and the house was swallowed in shadow. Still I worked, driven not by anger, but by clarity. If Lindsay thought she could rob me blind and then spin tales about independence, she was about to learn just how wrong she was. At some point, curiosity pushed me to open her Instagram feed. My hands trembled slightly as I tapped through her stories. There she was, radiant in the golden light of a Florida sunset, raising a glass of champagne with Chad beside her. Captions flowed beneath each post like poison. Living my best life. Blessed beyond measure. Independent and free. Independent. The word made me laugh bitterly. Independent while living off the sweat of my decades of work. Independent while charging $24,000 to my card in 6 months. Then I saw the one that stopped me cold. A shaky video inside a cheap motel room, peeling wallpaper in the background. Her voice narrated, "This is where my father has forced me to stay on what should have been my dream vacation." This is the kind of abuse people don't see. Financial control, manipulation, using money as a weapon. My chest tightened. She was twisting the truth into something monstrous, painting herself as a victim, me as the villain. And people were listening. The comments were already piling up. Cut him off. Toxic parents never change. Sue him for emotional damages. I gripped the phone tighter, scrolling through each poisonous post. She called me controlling, manipulative, narcissistic. She turned every sacrifice I had made into evidence of abuse. My hands shook, not with fear, but with a fury I had never known. I set the phone down and took a long breath. My daughter was trying to destroy me, publicly, irreversibly. This wasn't just theft. This was war. But wars are not won with rage. They are won with strategy. I pushed the phone aside and opened my laptop again. My cursor hovered over the contact list. There was one man I trusted with matters like this, a man who had stood by me through contracts, disputes, and my divorce, Douglas Kerrigan, my lawyer. My voice was steady when I called his office the next morning. "Douglas, it's Harold Whitaker. I need an urgent appointment. Today, if possible." There was a pause. Then his calm secretary replied, "Mr. Whitaker, Douglas has a slot at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Will that work?" "Yes," I said. "I'll be there." I hung up and sat back in my chair, the decision solidifying inside me. It was time to stop being the man who covered Lindsay's mistakes. It was time to be the man who built roads and bridges that could withstand storms. It was time to make sure my legacy went to the child who had earned it, Ethan, not the one who had tried to steal it. That night, I gathered every document I had prepared into a neat leather portfolio. My notes were meticulous, every charge linked to evidence, every lie documented. I imagined handing the folder to Douglas, imagined his eyebrows rising as he read the truth. As midnight approached, I poured myself a glass of water and stood by the window. The street outside was still, the lampposts casting long shadows across driveways. I thought of Ethan, probably asleep in his modest home across town, exhausted from another 60-hour work week, providing for his family with quiet pride. I thought of Lindsay, likely posting another photo from Florida, still convinced she had beaten me at my own game. But she hadn't. She had only revealed who she truly was, and in doing so, she had given me the weapon I needed to cut her out for good. The house was silent, except for the ticking of the clock in the hallway. I raised my glass slightly, as though toasting to no one in particular, and whispered into the dark, "Enjoy it while you can, because when you land, everything will be gone." At 2 o'clock in the morning, I sat with a whiskey in hand, my finger hovering over the confirm button that would cancel Lindsay's luxury reservations. The house around me was silent. the kind of silence that makes every thought echo louder, every decision feel heavier. My study lamp cast a pale cone of light across the desk, illuminating the screen, the glass, and the folder of documents I had assembled like a case file against my own daughter. I remembered her tears years ago when I had refused to buy her that BMW at first. She had cried for hours, slammed her bedroom door, and refused to speak to me until I finally relented. Back then, I told myself I was just trying to keep the peace, trying to show her I loved her. But sitting there in the early hours of the morning, I realized I had been planting the seeds of entitlement with every surrender. She had always believed she could cry, demand, manipulate, and get her way. Tonight, for the first time, she was about to learn that her father could say no. The glow of the laptop screen reflected in the whiskey glass as I swirled the amber liquid slowly. The cursor blinked on the cancellation page of the Oceanfront Grand Resort. The words were clear: Presidential Suite, non-refundable. My thumb hesitated for only a heartbeat before I pressed the button. The page refreshed, and with it came a notification. Your reservation has been canceled. A confirmation email has been sent. A strange calm washed over me. One by one, I moved through the list of charges. I dialed Enterprise Rent-A-Car, listening to the automated voice before being transferred to an agent. Yes, I need to cancel a luxury convertible reservation under Lindsay Hayes. No, I am not concerned about the cancellation fee. Just process it. My voice was steady, firm, the tone of a man used to giving instructions on projects worth millions of dollars. Blue Water Helicopter Tours was next. The young woman on the other end tried to salvage part of the booking. Sir, since you're canceling within 24 hours, we can only refund about 40%. That's acceptable, I replied. Cancel it. One by one, the indulgences Lindsay had lined up for her dream vacation crumbled. The paradise dining experience, the private beach cabana, the deep-sea fishing charter. Every single one was struck from existence, the digital equivalent of dismantling a bridge beam by beam until nothing remained. As the confirmations piled into my email inbox, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: control. For years, I had felt like a man watching the slow erosion of his own authority, sand slipping through his fingers while Lindsay's demands grew bigger and bolder. Tonight, I was taking back the ground I had lost. The last step was the most satisfying. I logged into my American Express account, navigated to the Authorized Users section, and found her name. Lindsay Hayes, remove user. The system asked, "Are you sure you want to remove this user?" My finger hovered only for an instant. Then I clicked confirm. Her access to my money evaporated in that moment, gone as surely as if I had cut a cord. By the time I leaned back in my chair, it was nearly 2:30 in the morning. My whiskey glass sat empty. The grandfather clock in the hall ticked steadily, marking the passage of time that had turned me from an indulgent father into something colder, harder, more deliberate. I had canceled more than a vacation that night. I had canceled a lifetime of enabling. I shut down the laptop and climbed the stairs slowly, each creak of the wood a reminder that I was no longer young, but still strong enough to make decisions that mattered. When I slid under the covers, the silence of the house wrapped around me. For the first time in years, I slept soundly, without the nagging weight of doubt pressing on my chest. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the curtains, warm and golden. I stretched, savoring the rare peace that came with clarity. It wasn't until I reached for my phone on the nightstand that the storm revealed itself. 15 missed calls, all from Lindsay. The first had come in at 6:23 a.m., the most recent just minutes before I awoke. My voicemail icon blinked insistently. I padded to the kitchen, started the coffee maker, and let the aroma fill the air while I checked the messages. The first was panicked. "Dad, there's some kind of mistake. The hotel says the payment didn't go through. Call me back right away. The next was sharper. Why aren't you answering? The car rental's been canceled too. This is insane. Call me. By the 10th message, her voice was ragged with fury. I know you did this. You're trying to ruin everything. You can't treat me like this. I took a long sip of coffee, the bitterness grounding me. Outside, the newspaper lay folded on the front step. I picked it up, the normalcy of the act almost absurd in contrast to the chaos unfolding on the other end of my daughter's phone. The phone buzzed in my hand again. Another call. I let it go to voicemail, listening as her voice spilled into the speaker. Dad, please. We're stuck in some disgusting motel off the highway. The air conditioning barely works, and Chad is furious. You have to fix this. You can't just leave us like this. I shook my head, leaning against the counter. The same girl who had once begged for a pink bicycle with wide, innocent eyes was now begging for a 5-star suite. The same girl who had once cried over a totaled car was now crying because her fraud had collapsed around her. I turned the phone face down on the counter and let it buzz in silence. Later that morning, after breakfast, I logged back into my email. Each cancellation confirmation was there, lined up like trophies. I clicked them one by one, savoring the neat finality of the words. Your reservation has been canceled. My mind drifted back to my years in construction, to the times when I had to sign off on demolitions before new projects could begin. There was always something bittersweet about tearing down a structure you had worked on, but there was also satisfaction in clearing away the rot, making space for something stronger. That's what I had done. I had demolished the rotten framework of entitlement I had allowed Lindsay to build. The phone rang again at mid-morning. I answered this time, my voice calm. Morning, sweetheart. You're up early. Her reply came sharp and breathless. Dad, what did you do? Everything's gone. The suite, the car, the tours. They said the cardholder canceled everything. I looked out the window at the neighbor's garden, at the roses blooming in neat rows. That's terrible. Did they say who called? They said it was the cardholder, but that's impossible because we paid for everything ourselves, remember? Of course I remember, I said evenly. You told me you and Chad had saved up. Her voice cracked with frustration. We did. So why would the hotel think the cardholder canceled? I let the silence hang for a beat before replying softly. I have no idea, sweetheart. Where are you staying now? Her answer came in a rush. Some terrible place off the highway. It's disgusting. We can't stay here. You have to help us. I'm sorry this happened to you both, I said, my tone steady. Inside, I felt a grim satisfaction. Dad. Her voice dropped to a whisper, suspicion threading through it. You didn't. You wouldn't have. I let the pause stretch just long enough. Wouldn't have what, Lindsay? Nothing, never mind. But I could hear it in her voice. The seed of realization had been planted. The line was quiet for a moment before she spoke again, sharper this time. We're not staying in this dump. Fix this. I closed my eyes, inhaling the scent of coffee and roses drifting from outside. When I opened them, I spoke the truth for the first time in years. No. The silence that followed was louder than any shouting could have been. She sputtered, searching for words, but I ended the call before she could find them. I set the phone down and turned back to the window, watching the sunlight spill across my lawn. For the first time in decades, I felt no weight on my chest, no fear of what she might say or demand. I had done what needed to be done. By 2:30 in the morning, it had been finished. By sunrise, the consequences had arrived. And by mid-morning, I knew she was beginning to understand that her father was no longer the man she could bend with tears and manipulation. The next morning, I woke to 15 missed calls and 1 buzzing voicemail. Dad, What did you do? The phone rang again, Lindsay's number flashing, her voice sharp with rage when I answered. For a moment I let the sound of her fury wash over me, a storm I had seen building ever since I pressed those cancellation buttons in the early hours of the morning. I thought back to her words not long ago, when she had brushed off her theft, as if it were nothing. What's yours will be mine, one day anyway. That single sentence had been lodged in my mind like a shard of glass, and now, listening to her unravel on the other end of the line, I realized just how deeply she had meant it. Her voice cracked with outrage. Dad, what in God's name did you do? The hotel says the reservation's gone. The car is gone. The tours, everything. They told me the cardholder canceled. Don't lie to me. Was it you? I steadied my voice, calm, like I had been on job sites when crews panicked over a collapsed scaffold or a deadline blown apart. Good morning to you too, Lindsay. Sounds like you're having quite the rough start. This isn't funny, she shrieked. You ruined everything. Do you have any idea what kind of position you put us in? We're stuck in a disgusting motel off the interstate, and Chad is livid. The air conditioner rattles like it's going to fall out of the wall, and the bathroom floor is slimy. I didn't deserve this. I poured myself another cup of coffee, letting her words tumble into my ear without shaking me. I'm sorry to hear that. Though if you and Chad paid for all of this with your own money, I suppose you should take it up with the resort. You know damn well what happened, she hissed. You canceled everything, didn't you? Why would I do that? I asked mildly. I thought you saved for this trip. Isn't that what you told me? She gave a short, bitter laugh. Dad, stop playing games. You think you're teaching me some kind of lesson, but you're only making yourself look like a controlling tyrant. You've always used money to manipulate me. This is just another example. Her words struck like darts, each one designed to wound. But I kept my tone level, controlled. Lindsay, I need you to hear me clearly. What you did wasn't borrowing, and it wasn't family sharing. It was theft. You used my card without permission for months, and then tried to convince me you'd saved up for this trip. You're being dramatic, she snapped. It's not theft when it's family. It's not like you're hurting for money. You've got more than you'll ever spend. You'd just leave it to me eventually anyway. So what's the difference if I use it now? That line, so casual, so entitled, hit me harder than any of the others. Eventually, I repeated softly. You think you're entitled to what I've earned just because of blood? Yes, she cried. God, Dad, why do you make everything so complicated? You worked hard, you made a good life, but don't you get it? That's supposed to pass down. That's how family works. You provide, I benefit. Why can't you just accept that? I let the silence linger, staring out the window at the neat rows of hedges I trimmed myself every summer. A bird darted from one branch to another. The world outside was calm, grounded, real. Her words sounded like they came from another planet. Finally, I spoke. Family works when respect flows both ways. When gratitude balances sacrifice. What you're describing isn't family, it's parasitism. She sucked in a breath, then spat out, You're horrible. You've always been horrible. Always dangling money like it's a leash around my neck. Well, guess what? I don't need you anymore. People know what you've done. They've seen my posts. They're on my side. I felt a flicker of pain at that, remembering the social media stories she had posted, the lies, the twisted accusations. In a matter of hours, she had smeared my name across a stage of strangers, painting me as an abuser instead of a father. But that pain quickly cooled into resolve. You can tell whatever stories you want online, Lindsay. People who don't know the truth may believe you. But you and I both know the truth. You stole. You lied. And when caught, you tried to weaponize sympathy against me. That isn't strength. It's cowardice. Her breathing grew heavier, ragged with either fury or fear. It was hard to tell. "So what, Dad? What's your endgame? Do you want me to crawl on my knees and beg for forgiveness? Do you want me to announce to the world that I was wrong? That's not going to happen." I shook my head slowly, even though she couldn't see me. "What I want is for you to realize the person you've become. I want you to understand that actions have consequences, even when your victim is your own father." Her voice hardened to stone. "Then you'll regret this. I'll make sure you regret this. If you thought canceling my vacation was the end, you're dead wrong. I'm going to show you just how much power I have now." The words slid through the phone line like a threat. But instead of frightening me, they settled into my chest as confirmation. She wasn't just entitled, she was ready to escalate. And in her arrogance, she was about to overplay her hand. The call ended with her voice ringing in my ear. "You'll regret crossing me, Dad. Everyone's going to know what kind of man you really are." I stood in the kitchen, the mug warm in my hand, listening to the silence that followed. The grandfather clock in the living room chimed the hour, deep and resonant. I leaned against the counter and exhaled slowly. The confrontation had peeled away the last illusions. There was no more pretending this was a misunderstanding, no more hoping she would suddenly realize the depth of her wrongs. She believed she was owed, and she would scorch the earth to defend that belief. As much as it hurt to hear her threats, a clarity also came with them. I knew what had to be done next. The truth would have to be laid out, documented, undeniable. And she would face the consequences she thought she could outrun. But as much as my mind spun with plans, as much as the documents waited on my desk upstairs, I let myself stand for just a moment longer in the quiet of that kitchen, holding on to the simple act of sipping coffee while sunlight spilled across the counter. It grounded me, reminded me of who I was, an honest man, a man who had worked for everything he owned, a man who had given until it nearly broke him. She wanted to twist that into cruelty. I was ready to show her what real cruelty looked like, the cruelty of truth. And I knew it was only a matter of time before she pushed this beyond angry phone calls, beyond online slander. She was desperate now. And desperation makes people reckless. I turned my eyes toward the phone, still warm from the call, and whispered into the quiet room, "Let her try. I'll be ready." The words still hung in the air when I realized the danger of what she had said. She wasn't just lashing out. She was plotting something bigger, something meant to break me. But she had forgotten who raised her. She had forgotten who taught her how the world works. She had forgotten that every time she thought she was pulling the strings, I was already building the foundation under her feet. And now she was dancing on a foundation about to collapse. She hangs up with venom. "You'll regret crossing me, Dad. Everyone's going to know what kind of man you really are." A courier delivered a thick envelope to my front door. "You are being served." I stood there in the doorway, the morning sunlight spilling across the porch, the envelope heavy in my hand. For a moment I didn't move. The young man in the courier uniform nodded politely, oblivious to the storm he had just delivered into my home. I signed his clipboard mechanically, my name scrawled across the line like a man signing away the last piece of peace he had left. I carried the envelope inside, the weight of it dragging on my fingers, and set it on the dining table. The table was oak, solid, the same one where my family had once gathered for Thanksgiving dinners and Christmas breakfasts. Today, it was just me, the envelope, and the silence of a house that had grown too big. I stared at it for a long time before finally tearing it open. The words leapt off the page like acid. Plaintiff, Lindsay Hayes. Defendant, Harold Whitaker. My own daughter suing me. The accusations were bold, venomous, psychological abuse, financial manipulation, intentional infliction of emotional distress. I sat back in my chair, my breath leaving me in a heavy sigh. Abuse, Manipulation. The paper painted me as a tyrant who had used money as a weapon to control her life, who had dangled support with strings attached, who had deliberately sabotaged her happiness. And now, she was asking the court for $250,000 in damages. For a moment, my vision blurred. I pressed my fingers to my temples, trying to steady myself. $250,000. Not only had she stolen from me, not only had she lied and smeared me on social media, but now she was dragging my name into court, demanding even more. I pushed back from the table and walked to the window, staring out at the quiet street. The neighbors' lawns were green, kids rode their bikes down the sidewalk, and somewhere a lawnmower droned. The world went on as if nothing had changed, but everything had. I walked back to the table and forced myself to read every word. The lawsuit reframed my life's work as oppression. The trust fund I had created for her 30th birthday was described as a bribe meant to keep her loyal. My decision to cancel her vacation was painted as malicious sabotage designed to cause maximum psychological harm. Even my years of paying for her education and supporting her through her mistakes were twisted into evidence that I had manipulated her, made her dependent so she could never stand on her own. The words were lies, but they were lies dressed in legal clothing. Lies that could hurt me. I stood up and went to the filing cabinet in my office. My hands moved with the muscle memory of a man used to keeping records. I pulled out the folders I had assembled over the last week: bank statements, canceled checks, receipts for tuition, car payments, rent deposits, wedding contributions. I stacked them on the desk until the pile stood as tall as my arm. 29 years of generosity. Documented, proven, undeniable. When I looked at the pile of evidence, something inside me steadied. This lawsuit wasn't just an attack. It was proof. Proof that Lindsay had crossed a line she couldn't return from. Proof that she would rather destroy me than admit her own choices. I picked up the phone and dialed Douglas Kerrigan's office. His secretary answered, calm as always. Mr. Whitaker, I assume you've been served. Yes, I said, my voice steady now. I need to see Douglas as soon as possible. Hold, please. A moment later, Douglas's voice came on the line. Smooth, deep, professional. Harold, I was expecting your call. How are you holding up? I've been better, I admitted. The lawsuit is here, and it's worse than I imagined. Let me guess, he said. Abuse, manipulation, financial control. I was silent. How did you know? Because this is exactly what entitled people do when they face consequences. They reframe reality to make themselves the victim. It's a pattern I've seen before. His calmness steadied me. I've compiled everything. Statements, records, proof of unauthorized charges, even screenshots of her social media posts accusing me of sabotage. Good, Douglas said firmly. We'll need all of it. The key here is to stay grounded in the facts. You're not the monster she's trying to paint you as. You're a father who has given hundreds of thousands of dollars freely, and when you finally said no, she retaliated. She wants $250,000, I said bitterly. She can want the moon, Harold. That doesn't mean she'll get it. I sat back in my chair, the leather cool under my palms. His words were steady, reassuring. Still, the image of my daughter filing papers in a lawyer's office burned in my mind. I could picture her sitting beside Chad, nodding along as he pushed her toward this. She's trying to ruin me, I said quietly. No, Douglas replied. She's trying to manipulate you into backing down. If you cave now, she gets what she wants. If you stand firm, she has nothing but lies. And lies crumble in court. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. I'm not backing down. Good. Bring the documents to my office tomorrow morning. We'll start drafting our response. And Harold... His voice softened just slightly. I know this hurts, but try to see it for what it is. She's showing you exactly who she is. Believe her. When the call ended, I sat in silence for a long time. The lawsuit papers were still spread across the dining table, their accusations like black stains against the oak grain. I looked at them, then at the stack of my own documents in the office. 2 stories sat side by side, hers built on lies, mine built on decades of sacrifice. I knew which one would hold up under scrutiny. That night, I worked late into the evening, organizing the evidence into binders. Every charge Lindsay had made without permission, every payment I had covered, every gift, every loan. I highlighted dates, cross-referenced with her Instagram posts, matched stories to receipts. By midnight, the binders were neat, labeled, undeniable. I leaned back in my chair, exhausted but clear-headed. For years I had been the father who bent, who yielded, who gave in the name of love. Now I was something else. I was a man preparing to defend his dignity. And in that clarity came a strange peace. I closed the last binder and turned off the light in the office. The house settled into darkness around me, the quiet ticking of the clock filling the rooms. I walked upstairs, pausing in the hallway where family photos lined the wall. Lindsay's smile stared back at me from one frame, Ethan's from another. I reached out and touched the glass of Ethan's wedding photo. He had never asked me for more than he needed. He had always repaid every debt. He had always respected what I had built. I whispered to the quiet hallway, "You'll be the one who carries this forward, not her." The next morning, as I loaded the binders into my car, I felt the weight of years lifting off me. The lawsuit had been meant to break me. Instead, it had solidified me. She wanted to destroy me in court. I was ready to meet her there. I whispered to myself, "You wanted war, Lindsay. Now you'll see what real consequences look like." The pounding on my front door rattled the glass panes as Chad Hayes' voice thundered, "Open up, old man. We need to talk." I froze for just a moment, coffee mug still warm in my hand, before setting it gently on the kitchen counter. I had known this moment was coming ever since Lindsay hung up on me days ago with the promise that I'd regret crossing her. My lawyer had warned me that entitled people rarely stop when they feel cornered. They escalate. And here they were, escalating right on schedule. As I walked toward the door, I thought of her words, the ones that had cut me deeper than the lawsuit itself. "You worked hard. You made a good life. But don't you get it? That's supposed to pass down. You provide, I benefit." That line was seared into me, and now, as the pounding grew louder, I realized this was the physical manifestation of that belief, her and Chad, demanding access to my life's work as though it belonged to them. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. Chad stood there, red-faced, fists clenched, his frame filling the doorway like a threat. Lindsay was just behind him, her face blotchy, eyes puffy, clutching crumpled legal papers in her hand. She looked like a storm barely held back, but Chad, he was the storm already breaking loose. "This is insane!" Chad barked, pushing past me into the living room without waiting for an invitation. His shoulders were tense, his eyes darting around my house like he was already measuring what might one day be his. "You can't just take away money that isn't yours." I closed the door behind them calmly, ignoring the heat in his words. "This is my house, Chad. You don't get to barge in here and make demands." "That trust fund belongs to Lindsay," he snapped, pointing at the papers in her trembling hand. "You promised it. You can't just steal it back because you've got some vendetta against your own daughter." I turned to face him squarely, keeping my voice even. "No. That trust fund belonged to the daughter I thought I was raising. It belonged to a young woman with character, integrity, and respect. It doesn't belong to a thief who lied to my face and then tried to ruin my reputation when I finally held her accountable." Lindsay's face crumpled as though my words were daggers. She sank onto the couch, clutching the papers tighter. "Dad, please," she said, her voice breaking. I'm sorry about the credit card thing. I'll pay you back. I'll get a better job. I'll work more hours. I'll do whatever you want. I studied her carefully. For a moment I saw flashes of the little girl she had once been, the girl who used to slip handwritten cards under my office door on Father's Day, decorated with stick figures and hearts. But the woman in front of me now was not that girl. She was someone who had stolen from me, lied, and dragged me into court without hesitation. What I want, I said quietly, is a daughter who doesn't steal from me and then lie about it. Chad stepped closer, lowering his voice into something darker. You're going to fix this, old man. You're going to call your lawyer and undo whatever you pulled. You're going to reinstate that trust and rewrite your will, or... I tilted my head slightly. Or what? Or you're going to find out what happens when you mess with the wrong people. His jaw was tight, the muscles twitching, his fists flexing like he wanted me to flinch. I didn't move. Instead, I reached for my phone in my pocket, holding it up casually. Are you threatening me in my own home, Chad? Before he could answer, a voice cut through the tension. Mr. Whitaker, is everything all right? We all turned toward the doorway. My neighbor, Eleanor Pratt, stood on my porch, gray hair pulled back, a cardigan wrapped tight around her shoulders. She had probably been tending her roses when she heard the shouting. Her eyes moved quickly from Chad's red face to Lindsay's tear-streaked cheeks, and then to me. Eleanor, I said, my tone softening. We're fine. Just a family discussion that got a little heated. Her eyes narrowed slightly, unconvinced. Chad took a step back, his posture changing instantly, his threatening stance dissolving into something more socially acceptable now that there was a witness. Lindsay wiped at her cheeks, trying to compose herself. If you're sure, Eleanor said carefully. Well, it sounded serious. We were just leaving, Lindsay said quickly, standing up and tugging at Chad's arm. Her voice trembled, but her eyes flashed at me with venom. Weren't we, Chad? For a moment, he held my gaze, his jaw working silently. Then he gave a tight nod and let her pull him toward the door. As they passed me, Chad leaned close, his voice low enough for only me to hear. This isn't over. His shoulder brushed mine deliberately, a gesture meant to intimidate. Yes, it is, I replied calmly, meeting his stare without flinching. And if you threaten me again, I'll call the police. Is that clear? He said nothing, but his eyes burned with the kind of anger that comes from a man realizing his intimidation no longer worked. I watched from the window as they walked down the path to their car. Lindsay's hands were flying as she gestured, her voice shrill even from a distance. Chad slammed the driver's side door harder than necessary, and the car roared to life before tearing down the street. Behind me, Eleanor lingered on the porch. I opened the door again, offering her a tired smile. Harold, are you sure you're okay? She asked, her eyes filled with concern. That young man seemed very angry. Family problems, I said gently. Nothing I can't handle. But thank you, Eleanor. Really. She studied me for a moment, then nodded. If you need anything, Harold, you know where to find us. My husband and I are always home in the evenings. Thank you, I said again. She gave me one last worried glance before heading back across the street. When the door closed, I leaned against it, my hands trembling slightly. Not from fear, but from the adrenaline still coursing through me. Chad had threatened me, Lindsay had begged and accused in the same breath, and Eleanor had seen enough to know the truth, that whatever was happening inside my home wasn't just a discussion. I walked back to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and took a long sip. The house felt larger now, emptier somehow, echoing with the remnants of raised voices. For the first time since this all began, a flicker of doubt crept in. Had I been too harsh? Could I have handled it differently? But then, I thought of the lawsuit, the lies on social media, the $24,000 siphoned from my account. I thought of Lindsay's words, that my life's work was hers by right, that she had every justification for stealing because family money wasn't really mine. No, I hadn't been too harsh. I had simply stopped enabling. I locked the door for the first time in years, sliding the bolt into place with a quiet finality. They could come back, they could yell, they could threaten, but they couldn't undo what I had already put in motion. The legal documents were signed, the trust fund transferred, the will rewritten. Lindsay could cry, Chad could rage, but the foundation had shifted, and this time it was solid. As the house settled into silence again, I whispered to myself, "It's over for them now." The envelope slid into my mailbox with a quiet thud, its edges sharp against the pile of ordinary bills and advertisements. I pulled it out with a strange calm, already knowing what it contained. It had been weeks since Lindsay and Chad stormed my house, weeks since the threats, the lawsuit, the shouting. Silence had followed. An eerie quiet that made me wonder whether they were regrouping or retreating. Now, holding the envelope, I realized I was about to find out. Back inside, I sat at the dining table, the same oak table where I had read the first lawsuit papers, the same table where years of family meals had once been shared. The afternoon light spilled through the blinds, cutting stripes across the wood. I opened the envelope slowly, sliding out the single sheet of paper inside. Notice of withdrawal. Plaintiff Lindsay Hayes has dropped her suit against defendant Harold Whitaker. I stared at the words for a long moment. Dropped. She had walked away from the very battle she had sworn to fight. My chest tightened, not with relief but with something more complicated. My phone buzzed then, vibrating across the table. A text from an unfamiliar number. Dad, it's me. I had to change my number. I dropped the lawsuit. I'm not fighting you anymore. I read it once, then again. My hand tightened around the phone as the message continued to unfold across the screen. I've had a lot of time to think these past few weeks. Ryan and I separated. He was the one who pushed for the lawsuit. He said we could make you pay for disrespecting us. But when I sat in that lawyer's office and listened to him talk about destroying you, I realized I didn't recognize myself anymore. I leaned back, the phone heavy in my hand, as her words poured out in black and white. I did steal from you. I can't pretend otherwise. I convinced myself it was fine because we're family, but that's not how family works. You raised me better than this. Somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing your success as something to respect and started seeing it as something I deserved. I was wrong. I'm not asking you to forgive me right away. I just wanted you to know that I finally understand. Actions have consequences. Respect has to be earned. Family doesn't mean you get a free pass to hurt people. The words blurred as I read them a third time. They didn't sound like the manipulative, entitled daughter who had screamed at me in my living room, who had smeared me on social media, who had filed a lawsuit filled with venom. They sounded like the girl I once knew, the girl who used to curl up next to me on the couch with her bedtime stories, the girl who used to whisper that I was the best dad in the world. But I had been fooled before. I set the phone down, carefully, staring at it as though it might reveal the truth if I looked long enough. Could people change this quickly? Could Lindsay really shed years of entitlement because a relationship ended and a lawsuit felt too heavy to carry? Or was this just another performance, another story crafted to pull me back into her orbit? The house was silent. I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the garden I had neglected during this storm. The roses needed pruning. The grass was high. Life had continued moving forward even while I was buried under betrayal and paperwork. I thought of Ethan. He hadn't asked for any of this. When I called to tell him about the trust fund changes, his voice had been hesitant. "Dad, I don't feel right about taking money that was meant for her," he had said. But I reminded him of the truth. He had earned my respect, not by asking, but by living with dignity. Now I wondered what he would say if I told him Lindsay had backed down. Would he see it as growth, or would he warn me not to let my guard down? I walked back to the table and picked up the phone again. The message was still there, waiting for my response. I love you, Dad. I hope someday you can love me again, too. I closed my eyes, her words echoing in my mind. I thought about all the years I had given. College tuition, cars, rent, vacations, $345,000, not counting the little things. I thought about the lies, the manipulations, the theft. I thought about the lawsuit, the public humiliation, the threats from Chad. Love her again. Did I ever stop? The truth was, I never stopped. Love doesn't evaporate just because it's betrayed. It lingers, stubborn, even when it hurts. But trust, that was something else entirely. Trust was like the bridges I had built in my career. Strong when maintained, resilient under stress, but when cracks spread unchecked, collapse was inevitable. And once a bridge collapses, you don't walk across it the next day. You rebuild slowly, carefully, piece by piece. That's what Lindsay didn't understand. Not yet. Love was still there, but trust would take years to rebuild, if it ever could. I typed a response, then deleted it. I typed again, then erased the words. Anything I wrote now would either give too much or sound too hollow. In the end, I set the phone back down without answering. I stood and walked into the living room. The mantel was lined with family photos. Lindsay at 5 on her pink bicycle, Lindsay at 16 with her BMW, Lindsay at her graduation. Beside those, Ethan's wedding photo, his smile steady, his arm around his wife. The two paths diverged right there on my mantelpiece. One child who saw my sacrifices as a gift to respect, the other who saw them as a debt I owed her. The clock chimed softly in the corner. The house settled into its evening quiet. I whispered into the silence. You wanted war, Lindsay. You got it. And maybe, just maybe, you've finally learned what real consequences look like. For the first time in months, I sat back in my recliner and closed my eyes without fear of the phone buzzing, without fear of the next demand or accusation. The fight was over, at least for now. And while the wounds were still raw, I felt something I hadn't in years. Peace. Because no matter what came next, whether Lindsay's change was genuine or just another performance, the truth had already been revealed. She had shown me who she was. She had forced me to stop enabling, to draw the line I should have drawn long ago. And I knew this much with certainty. I would never go back to the man who let her take without consequence. The man who stood now was different, stronger, clearer, unbreakable. I set the phone back down without responding, whispering to the quiet. If she truly means it, time will prove it. Until then, the door is cracked open, but the trust fund stays exactly where it is,